Hello, Brother Barnabas here again. Glad you could join me for another encouraging word from the Word. And we're going to pick up from where we left off last time in our study of Philippians. And we're going to start with Philippians 1, verse 15. And Paul is talking about those that are preaching the gospel. You might remember from earlier in this chapter, Paul talked about how he was in chains for promoting the gospel, for preaching the gospel. And the people in Philippians were enduring the same persecution that he is, that they're being persecuted for preaching the gospel, but because of Paul's chains, because of the persecution upon Paul and his standing strong and through it, others are being more emboldened to preach the gospel all the more. And so we pick it up in verse 15, where Paul writes, "It is true that some preach Christ out of envy and rivalry, but others out of goodwill. The latter do so out of love, knowing that I am put here for the defense of the gospel. The former preach Christ out of selfish ambition, not sincerely, supposing that they can stir up trouble for me while I'm in chains. But what does it matter? The important thing is, in every way, whether false motives or true, Christ is preached. And because of this, I rejoice. Yes, I will continue to rejoice." So Paul is rejoicing in the midst of persecution, in the midst of being chained up, and he's writing from Rome, as we talked about before, and to the Philippians, and he's under house arrest by the palace guard, and he is preaching the gospel to his guards, to whoever comes to visit him, everyone, and the gospel is spreading. And it appears that some in Philippi were preaching the gospel not out of pure motives of hoping to see the gospel advanced, but they just had such a hatred of Paul that they wanted to preach the gospel and get him in more trouble. So there's a couple interesting really points here for us and some application too. First of all, it does the motives of the person preaching isn't as important as that the gospel is preached. So here's some people that are preaching just to get Paul in trouble. Paul says that's okay as long as Christ is being preached. And today sometimes it's easy to slip into our little judgmental boxes or whatever, I don't know, theological boxes, and we can say, so-and-so is preaching the gospel just for money, or so-and-so is preaching the gospel just because he wants to be a just because he wants to be a mega pastor, and somebody else is preaching for whatever reason. I've had friends that they actually went into the ministry just because they thought it'd be an easy job. You don't have to do much, just work on Sundays, right? Little did they know. Anyways, so it doesn't matter the motive, but that Christ is preached. Now, Paul doesn't address the issue here of preaching a false gospel or heresy or things that are not of Christ, and he treats that in Galatians and other places. And so it does matter that we preach truth, that we preach Christ. But I think the lesson is, let's not be quick to condemn. Let's just rejoice if Christ is being preached. Let's rejoice, and Paul's just happy for that. Of course, many of his converts back in Philippi were doing so out of love, out of pure motives, and that's all the more special for him. And he says, "Yes, I will continue to rejoice, for I know that through your prayers and God's provision of the Spirit of Jesus Christ, what has happened to me will turn out for my deliverance. I eagerly expect and hope that I will in no way be ashamed, but will have sufficient courage, so that now, as always, Christ will be exalted in my body, whether by life or by death. For to me, to live is Christ, and to die is gain." So then, whatever happens, whether we preach the gospel or die trying, die from the persecution or whatever, What matters is that Christ is preached. Lord, help us to have that kind of attitude, Lord, that as long as Christ is being preached, it's a good thing, Lord. And help us not to be judging others, but Lord, help us to always put you first and preach boldly as we should. Be with each one of us today, Lord, as we face the challenges of the day. Continue praying as you're led. God bless.